Last week I said that robots needed to be more conversational than today's Alexa devices. This week I'm going to explain how to make more conversational UIs with these sort of devices. Both Google and Amazon are trying to make their devices highly conversational for the user with lots of content. In a way, Google had it slightly easier because they had as a basis their search capability, which gives them massive amount of content. Amazon had it slightly harder, but they were 2 years ahead in developing their assistant, and as a result they managed to get lots of developers on board who have now created 40,000 skills. Now, if you remember in my first video I explained that today we're producing lots of narrow intelligences like expert in playing chess or Go or doing a certain task such as driving a car, and by adding all these narrow intelligences together we would get more like human level intelligence, but that's still a long way off. If you look, we can take this diagram and replace those narrow intelligences with skills. Skills are just apps that are for the Amazon Echo, or they're called actions for the Google Assistant. Now, what Amazon are doing is they're trying to develop techniques for using this content in the normal conversation that a user has with Alexa. Currently they just support weather and ordinary facts that they get from Wikipedia and places like that, but little else. Now what they could do, or can do, is support data from these 40,000 skills that developers have produced, and they're trying it in a number of ways. Supposing a user says, "Give me stories about Jeff Bezos." This question could be satisfied by, say, of the 40,000 skills, it could be satisfied by a dozen skills in the system. And it could send those questions to the dozen skills that have matched that question and see whether they can respond. Now, in order to implement this, they've added a new intent called can fulfill intent request. This is just saying, are you able to answer this question? And the skill has to reply effectively yes and no. It has some extra detail, but it says yes or no effectively. And then the Amazon system needs to decide if it gets 2 yeses or 3 yeses. It has to decide which one to go for, and that might be based on how good that intent has been performing in the past. So as you can see, this is a way of increasing the content to the Echo device while maintaining the quality of the replies, because it measures how good the response was. It's also a way of Echo competing more effectively with the Google device. This is also a similar way to the way the actual brain works. When we're asked a question, our conscious mind will ask our subconscious mind to give me the answer. In fact, the subconscious mind might go off and find several answers. Different parts of the subconscious will give you several answers, and the conscious mind decides which of those answers is the best answer to give back. At its coarsest level, it's actually the two halves of the brain, the two hemispheres, which can give different answers. And this can be seen in some patients where, for psychological reasons, they've separated the two halves of the brain and they're working totally independently. In those cases, the two halves can actually give totally different answers, and you have sort of like a split personality. This is something that's been observed in real people. A totally different way Amazon are trying to solve the conversational issue is by having search domains which can interpret the actual meaning of a sentence. Now this is I think experimental, and this is very specific to the Amazon Echo itself. And if you're writing a skill, I'm not yet convinced this is the way to do it. And for the rest of this video I'll be explaining how, if you're a writer of a skill, how you might deal with this quite difficult issue of creating a viable conversation. Now let's imagine that you want to write a customer service skill to service your customers automatically for your business. Now let's also say that your customer service application might have several thousand different questions the user could ask, and that you group these together in, say, 1,000 groups, or what we call intents. These are groupings of those customer service questions. For an example is, why is my bill so high? Now when you build a skill, you actually divide your content up into three things: samples, slots and intents. I know it sounds complicated, but really it isn't. Samples are just phrases that the customer uses, and within that phrase there might be slots. These are just variables that the user might want to know. The example might be, when's my next train from a station name, and that station name can be a variable of all possible station names. It's as simple as that. And the final thing is the intents. This is what we just decide arbitrarily is a grouping of the different questions into similar sort of things. Now the problem is that with the Amazon Echo there are limits for each type, and in particular the number of intents, the maximum number of intents was 250 about a year ago. They're increasing it all the time, so today it might be a little bit more, but the number of intents is a limitation, but the number of slots is very much higher at 50,000, and the number of samples is actually quite limited at 200,000 characters. This might sound a lot, but actually in my experience that is also quite a major limitation. So when I tried to do this, I tried various techniques and most of them didn't work at all well. One of the problems is that if you have different intents with similar sample phrases in them, then you can get cross-pollination effectively between the intents. Because there might be 5 or 6 similar sounding words in different intents, the system gets confused and chooses the wrong intent. This is the real problem. So what I tried, which was much more successful, was to use the structure of the sentence as the intent rather than the actual meaning of the sentence. So if you start an example, what with the phrase what is something, then there would be a whole set of what is questions with the something being the slot, and then all the slots would go across all the lower level intents. So at the level of Alexa, it was language based intents, but within the skill itself I went back to the original domain based meaning of the intents, say going back to the actual meaning. Now this actually worked really well, and we were able to process something like several thousand different questions and do have responses for each of those questions. So it became much more conversational and much better. Longer term there might be other techniques that could be used, but this is what I recommend currently. Well, this is all I have time for this week, but next week I'll be starting a series of 3 episodes which will cover the subject of consciousness. This is a fascinating area. It's very complicated. There's a huge variety of ideas around which are inconsistent with each other. It makes it very interesting, and I look forward to telling you all about it. In the meantime, please subscribe on YouTube, like on LinkedIn or YouTube or both, and comment on either as well. Now, one of the problems about advertising it on LinkedIn and using it on YouTube is that the LinkedIn views don't actually go through as YouTube views, which is quite annoying, but there's little I can do about it. But it would help me a lot if the subscription were made on YouTube, and I put a link in LinkedIn to enable that. Thank you very much.